Hey, everybody. Before we get into this week's episode, I just want to say thank you for your patience. There's been a lot that has been going on, and I just haven't had the time or the bandwidth to dedicate to editing these podcasts to get them up. So I appreciate your patience. We are back, and we have some great episodes, some great guests coming. So I'm really excited to share these with you. Let's get back to it.
You're gonna learn a lot more by doing than you are by reading or, just by observing. So, you could be sitting on the sidelines for 2 or 3 years thinking about starting a blog, but you're gonna be a lot further along if you actually started. And, that first blog that you start may wind up being a total failure, and that's okay. That's, the way it usually works, but you're going to learn a lot more from it than you're going to learn just by sitting on the sidelines. So I would say, my advice to people who are thinking about starting something is just get started and learn as you go and understand that you're going to make mistakes. Don't feel like you have to be perfect. Any blogger that you talk to is going to tell you that they made a ton of mistakes in the beginning and still make mistakes. I still make mistakes all the time. So, um, but I think a lot of people are afraid to make a mistake or afraid to fail, really afraid to do something wrong. And so they feel like they can't get started until they know what they're doing. And really, that I think is the wrong approach.
That is Marc Andre this week on the Do It For Yourself podcast. Hey, my friend, welcome back to another episode here on the Do It For Yourself podcast. My name is Ian. I am your host, and this is my podcast. I'm happy that you made your way here. If you are a regular listener to the show, thank you for coming back. It's always nice to have you here tuning in with us. And if you are a new listener to the show, thank you for stopping by. And I hope that you enjoy this week's episode with Marc Andre. Before we get into Marc and his story, just really quick, if you could do me a huge favor and leave a review for the podcast on the Apple iTunes app, I would greatly appreciate it. It only takes a minute, but it's something that helps me out a ton with the show. So if you could do that, like I said, I'd greatly, greatly appreciate that. My guest is Marc Andre. And when I discovered Marc's story, I knew obviously that he was somebody that I really wanted to have a chat with because he is doing it for himself in a way that I was very new to. You see, Marc has built and sold multiple blogs for a significant amount of money. And I knew that people had purchased blogs and purchased websites, but I didn't know it was to this extent. And I also didn't know how these deals were structured, how these things came about. So I was really excited to sit down with Marc and hear a little bit more about how he has made a living doing it for himself, building and selling websites, and then, what he is up to now. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode with you, and I hope you enjoy. Marc, I just want to say thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to getting into your story here. I actually stumbled upon your story from an email blast that I'm subscribed to, and it's sometimes it's difficult to kind of weed through some of the things to find out who's going to be a good fit for your podcast. And there's not very much of a description sometimes for some of the guests who are looking to be interviewed for podcasts. But I kind of read through yours, and it piqued my interest. And like I said before we started recording, I saw that you were from Pennsylvania, and I'm from Pennsylvania as well. So I was like, oh, this is a semi local guy. And so I started reading through your story, and it was just something that there were so many things that were really jumping off the page for me there. So if you could just do me a favor and give a little bit of an intro as to who you are and what you're up to, what you're doing.
Sure. So, as you said, my name is Mark. I have been working full time as a blogger or internet marketer since 2008. I started my first blog in 2007 part time while I still had a full time job, and wound up going full time in late 2008. So it's been a little over about 11 and a half years now that I've been doing it full time. So I've had a few different websites and blogs over the years. I've had well, my first one was a web design blog, and then I also had some photography blogs after that. Right now, I'm running a personal finance blog, vitaldollar.com. And yeah, so I've done a few different things. I've also done some Amazon FBA for about 2 years. So it's been kind of several different things. I haven't managed the same site for all those 11 years.
And starting a blog in 2008, that's when blogging, really started to take off. But now maintaining a blog, it's got to be a little bit different. And I'm assuming some of the content has probably changed also over those 11 years, not just in regards to, you started with, um, photography and in that space, and now you've moved on to personal finance. Like the content itself has changed, but like kind of the delivery mechanism, has that changed at all?
Yeah, it has. I mean, if I were to look back at the articles I was writing when I first started, they were a lot different than what you would see on a lot of blogs, including my own today. Definitely, content is longer now, and I think that's mostly attributed to the fact that Google tends to favor longer content in their search algorithm. So, of course, those of us who are writing and want to rank on Google, we adjust and write longer and more detailed articles. So that's, I would say, is probably the most obvious thing is just the detail. When I first started, a lot of people were just writing shorter blog posts, and those things today are really getting shared on social media. Somebody might write something short on Facebook or somewhere else, but your blog posts, if you want them to rank and attract traffic, they're more in depth. And there's also more people competing for those first page rankings on Google. So um, you know that just adds to the fact that you're creating more in depth, trying to really create content that's going to stand out. And it's not always easy to stand out if people are writing, if there's 10 different bloggers writing about the same topic. You have to find a way to make yours better or make yours different. And so that leads to things like longer content, or maybe including more visuals like tables and infographics and stuff like that. Those types of things you probably didn't see as much of in 2007, 2008 when I was getting started.
And I want to kind of take a trip back down memory lane here to that point in time, that 2007, 2008 time, because you had started your blog just as a side hustle. And there's a running theme that we're going to see across all the blogs that you started. And that was that a lot of the things were kind of just a hobby. And you weren't necessarily a quote unquote expert at any of the things that you had started a blog on. But before we get into that, I want to talk about why it was that you started this side hustle. And I know that you weren't satisfied with the job that you were working at the time. So can you expand on that a little bit for me?
Sure. So I got started in my late 20s. And when I was in my 20s, at my first several years after college, I was always disappointed with the job I had. What I had several different jobs, and it didn't matter which one it was at the time. I never found a job that really gave me what I was looking for in terms of growth potential and income potential. Um, I kind of always just assumed I would go through college, I would graduate, I would work hard, I would get a job that I liked, and you know, progress throughout a career and stay with one company. Or, I definitely didn't anticipate that I would be changing jobs every year or anything. And then I got out, and I just got out of college, and I just couldn't find a job that really gave me what I was looking for. And so my response was to look for a new job. So I would start a job. I would be there for 6 months or so. I'd get frustrated and think like, yeah, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm not going anywhere. I need to look for something else. And I went through that pattern for about the first 4 years. The first 4 years I was out of college, I had four different jobs, and um, that last one, the fourth job, I stayed in for between 3 and 4 years, and that was the best job of the ones I had, but it still wasn't really what I was looking for, and I didn't really have much room for growth. And so while I was in that job, I started doing some web design. I had been kind of messing around on my own a little bit, and over the course of a couple years, kind of learning the basics of web design and stuff. And I had done a few websites for family members, and um, we're talking about very small websites, like for entrepreneurs or people who have a small business. And I was just setting up a real simple few page website. So I'd done a few of those, and I thought, I'm not really making much money at my job. I'd like to make a little bit more money just to have some spending money. And I like doing web design, so maybe I should look for some other clients. And so I set up a little portfolio website, and I needed to attract traffic to it in order to land some clients. So I added a blog to the site and started to publish articles with the hope of getting traffic to the site, getting some of those visitors to ultimately hire me to design their website. So that's why I originally started, was just to make a little bit of extra money. But once I got started, I really enjoyed it. And the blog actually started to grow really fast. And I really liked the blogging aspect of it. My approach did work. I did get clients that way. But I quickly found out that I enjoyed the blogging aspect of it a lot more than I enjoyed doing the design work for clients. And I saw a lot of potential with the blog. And so I kind of decided to change my approach. And then from there, I just focused on growing the blog and not so much client work. I did do a little bit of client work after that. But I really was focused on growing traffic and monetizing the blog through ads and other things like affiliate programs and stuff. So originally my intent when I first started was just to make a little bit of extra money. But pretty much as soon as I got started, I saw there's a lot of potential here, and I haven't found what I'm looking for at my job. So maybe the approach of just constantly looking for a better job isn't right. It hasn't worked for me to this point. I just started this blog as a side hustle. It's going pretty well. Maybe I can grow this to something full time and then not have to rely on an employer to give me the opportunity that I'm looking for. So that was kind of my motivation during those first few months.
Now, when we talk about, these jobs that you were working and, you were switching from job to job, do you think that it was the company that wasn't really getting you up and out of bed in the morning, and that's not, that's what wasn't quite a good fit, or do you think it was the work that wasn't a good fit?
I think it was both to a certain extent. I'd say it was probably more the work, but what was really frustrating was it, I really didn't have, as far as the company goes, I really didn't have an opportunity to go anywhere else. So I didn't really enjoy the job, but two of the first three companies I worked for were pretty small. And so once I realized I didn't like my job, there really was nothing else for me to do. It's not like there were a lot of internal, jobs that were available and I could just like apply to some other job and get a different job and have different opportunities. It was like, if I'm going to stay there, this is what I'm going to do. And um, so that aspect of it, I think it was partly the company, but really, it was just work that I didn't enjoy, and I didn't see a future. Like I could put up with a job that I didn't enjoy. In fact, a couple of the jobs I knew going in that I wasn't really going to enjoy the job, but I was kind of led to believe that there was more opportunity for growth in the future. And then once I got in, I just really didn't see it. And so, I would have been fine doing a job that I didn't like for a year, a couple of years even, if I had reason to believe that it was going to change in the future. But once I was in there long enough that I saw that it's not going to change, then that's when I was like, well, then I might as well just look for another job because I'm not going anywhere here.
And so it was kind of like, you knew you were gonna have to go through the paces and start kind of at the bottom and build yourself up kind of just like you would anywhere else, right? You're not gonna come in and just be the big man on campus. You have to build yourself up, and so you were hoping that that was gonna happen, and maybe even sometimes were kind of sold a dream that that was what could potentially happen, but then when you started to see the writing on the wall, that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the advice that I got when I was younger, and it was probably a lot more relevant to previous generations than it is, right now, was basically find a company and just work hard and you'll over time you'll work your way up. And I think maybe that approach worked 30, 40 years ago, but it doesn't really work very well today. I think a lot of companies, especially the ones that I've been around, they don't really promote from within very much. They'll, when an opening came up, they'd hire somebody from another company. And a lot of times that's the best way to increase your income is not to get promoted by the company that you're working for now. It's to find a different company. That's often the best way to increase your income. So, um, yeah, I mean, it just wasn't quite what I thought was gonna happen when I got out of college. I had a little bit of a false perception of what the working world was going to be like, I think.
And just out of curiosity, because I have seen this same kind of trend and common theme throughout some of the other entrepreneurs that I've interviewed here, but when it came to working under somebody and having a boss, um, did you ever find yourself just like, man, I don't like having someone who is telling me what to do, and you didn't necessarily kind of fight back against them, but it was just something inside you that was like, I cannot, like, I can't do this. I can't have somebody, breathing down my neck and watching over me and kind of telling me what to do all the time.
I really didn't have a problem with working for somebody, to be honest. I never envisioned myself as a business owner or an entrepreneur. I always thought I would be an employee. And even today, like I've been self-employed for more than 11 years, but I could go back to a job and have a boss. It wouldn't be my favorite thing in the world. I'd prefer to continue to do what I do, but I wouldn't have a huge problem with it. I could adjust. So that for me really wasn't a huge part of it. It was just the fact that I wasn't going anywhere,
Hmm.
and I saw opportunity you know, to get what I wanted by pursuing my own business. That's really what it came down to.
And so as you start to pursue this and you start to build up this blog, um, what were some of the things that you started to hone in on, or some of the things that you started to learn kind of as you were going, that you're like, oh, wait a minute, that was working. Okay, let me do more of that. And then this worked over here. Let me do some more of that. And you started to build up a lot of traction.
Early on, one of the biggest factors for really getting my blog off the ground at all in the first place was social media. And this was in 2007. So the social networks that were popular back then are different. I wasn't using Facebook or Twitter, Pinterest or Instagram or any of those. I was using Dig, Delicious, Stumble Upon, those sites that are not popular or not around anymore.
Mhm.
um, were very good for traffic in 2007. And so I was reading pretty much everything I could find on blogging, search engine optimization, social media, driving traffic. When I first got started, I didn't know at all what I was doing. That was my first blog. I had never had a blog before. In fact, I really didn't even know what a blog was. I kind of found out what it was when I was, installing WordPress. Um, so I didn't know at all what I was doing, and I was reading and implementing some things. And the social media aspect of it was really what gave me that first bit of momentum. And basically, the things that I had success with early on was creating list posts and using like resource lists to attract people to bookmark it or share it on social media. And that worked. And like literally one day I went from, and I forget the exact details, but I think it was something like 10 visitors in one day to 2,000 the next, because I had an article that did well on social media. In particular, it was on Delicious. Um, Now, of course, after that day, my traffic dropped down, but it never dropped back down to 10 visitors. It definitely was a permanent increase, even though there was a spike there. So I saw that I saw what was working with social media. And so, like you said, I replicated it. So I created more of the same types of content. I created different types of lists. I created different posts that I thought people would respond to on social media. And over the course of a few months, I really gained a lot of traction with social media, got to the point where I had, you know, more stable traffic coming to my site every day. Another thing that was working for me pretty well was networking with other bloggers. So I made a conscious effort to reach out to other bloggers, especially other design bloggers, other people who are writing about the same types of content that I was. And I got to know a few bloggers who were in a very similar stage to me. I had a few friends that started their blog that same year that I did, and we all kind of grew our blogs at the same time. And one thing that I did with networking was writing for other blogs, so writing guest posts. That really helped me to start to get connected to other people, start to get some links to my site, get some traffic. So I would say social media and networking were like the two big things really early on that started to give me that traction.
And when you start talking about creating this content and building this blog, one of the things that you said was that like you weren't really an expert in this field. So when it comes to creating content, where were you getting ideas and things to write, the blog posts on? Because you didn't have like a never ending source of knowledge when it came to building websites. So was this like a you were doing research on what was working and you were replicating that, but then you were also doing research on your own to learn more so that you were then able to produce more content?
Yeah, I was. It was definitely both. I was definitely learning a lot as I went, and early on, I was pretty limited to what I could write about. And one of the things I mentioned was that I did a number of resource lists, list posts, and that's the type of content that you don't have to be an expert to create that. Like for example, in web design, maybe I was writing an article on like the top 25 WordPress themes or something like that. You don't have to be a web design expert to do some Google searches and find the top WordPress themes and compile them into an article. And the same thing can be said with other industries as well. You could write list posts and resource lists in any industry, any niche, and they tend to do pretty well in social media. Now, they worked really well back then. They don't work quite as well today because people have seen so many of them already. But basically, there are a lot of types of content that you can create without being an expert. Um, so resource lists are one. You could interview somebody. I did a little bit of that where I would interview a web designer or someone in the industry. So I may not have that experience, but all I have to do is ask the questions and they answer them. And then, then you have some expert content on your blog. Um, you just kind of have to craft your content around your existing knowledge. And then as I gained knowledge and gained experience, then I was able to write a little bit more and kind of open up other new opportunities and, not be so limited to what I could write about.
And when it came to having experts on the show and asking questions and doing an interview, there was probably also times where you were asking questions that were questions that you yourself had, right? And then you're able to get an answer from somebody who is an expert. So that in and of itself is content for the interview. But then that's something that you learned that you could then expand upon and kind of almost create even a second post that you could then place on the blog. So it was almost like a double whammy at that point. You're able to create interview content, but then on top of it, you're learning and expanding your knowledge, which can then in turn create additional content.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Definitely.
So I want to get into, from the time that you started this blog, obviously we talked about how you were growing it, but from the time of starting it to the time of selling it, was this the first blog that you created? Was that the first blog that you sold in 2013?
The 2013, I sold the first blog I started. So let me try to explain this a little bit better. Um, 2007, I started my first blog.
Mm-hmm.
2008, I started a second blog, a second web design blog. And the reason was my first one that I started in 2007, like I mentioned before, that was kind of a portfolio site. I was hiring clients, or I'm sorry, clients were hiring me. I was offering web design services. So I saw that as a little bit more of like a company or an agency type of website. Now, I had a blog on there that attracted traffic, and the blog was what was really popular, but it was still kind of almost like a corporate website in the sense. And I had some ideas that I wanted to pursue for a more of a community oriented website. And so I started a second one because I didn't think some of those ideas would fit very well on my existing site. Like, for example, I had a job board for web designers. I had like a community news section that would link out to other design blogs and stuff. So I decided to put that on a second site. So I started my first one in 2007, started the second one in 2008, and then I sold that second one in 2010. So I wound up getting busy and not really having time to do everything that I wanted to do. And so I sold the second one. Was the first blog that I sold was actually the second one that I started, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Okay. All right.
But that one only sold, it was sold for $50,000. It wasn't as significant of a sale. So, um, but then later on, so after that sold in 2010, then for the next few years, I continued to manage the first one that I started and focus on growing that. And then I sold that in 2013 for $500,000.
And it's so that's the first number that I saw when I started looking through, your bio and everything. And this is the part that I was telling you that I really want to get into because I want to know how a deal like that comes about, how it's structured, and really the first part that I want to know is before we even get into how that deal came about is what made you even consider that deal? I know you said that you didn't have enough time to work on all the things that you wanted to work on, but was that the reason for selling, both of the blogs, or was there a different reason?
That was part of the reason. So in 2012, I started a photography blog. And at that point, I already had like my intention. I was already intending to sell the web design blog that I sold in 2013. Um, and I knew, this blog was doing really well. It was generating all of my income, and I knew I could sell it. I didn't know what I could sell it for, but I knew I could sell it. But if I sold it, then my income is gone. So I'd get a nice lump sum of money, but then I'm not making anything. Um, so I decided, well, if I'm thinking I might sell this site in a year, I should probably start something else. So I have something at least in the works. I'm not totally starting from scratch. And so I had picked up an interest in photography, and so I wound up starting this photography blog in 2012. And so it did pretty well, and it was growing and making some money. And so that was part of it, was that I really enjoyed the photography blog, and I wanted to focus on it. And so I wanted to free up some time. But the other thing was I had been working on this web design blog from 2007 to 2013. And aside from just being ready to do something else, um, I knew it had some value and I knew I could sell it. And when it got up to the point where I was looking at like $500,000, there's I was basically looking at the risk of selling it versus the risk of keeping it. Um, if I held on to it and I had a big drop in traffic, I had a big drop in revenue and profit, then all of a sudden the site's not worth as much anymore, and then I won't be able to sell it. So when it got to a point where I could get $500,000, it's not enough that I could retire on or anything like that, but it was what I considered a life-changing amount of money. And so once I got to that point, I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna essentially cash out and take it, consider it a successful project, for the 6 years I put into it, and and then move on and do something else. And so I looked at it basically. I kind of essentially felt like it was riskier to hold on to it than it was to sell it. Like a lot of people always ask, like, why would you want to sell a website that's making good money? And it is a valid question, but there are, there are risks to holding on to it. There's no guarantee that that revenue is going to continue. And actually, a year after I sold it, this site had a pretty big drop in search traffic because of a Google algorithm update, and so the profitability of it dropped. And so at that point, it was worth less than it was when I had it. So there are definitely risks there. So I was kind of like, I'd rather just take the sure thing now and be done, and rather than risking dropping in value.
And $500,000, that is a very significant amount of money, right? So even with your photography blog that you then started, I'm sure you weren't pulling the same kind of revenue from that blog that you were pulling from a blog that you just sold for $500,000. But when you put the two together, right? When you put together that lump sum of $500,000, and then you also have maybe a little bit of income coming from the photography blog, that was probably something that you could survive on for a little while you were then building it up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and actually the photography blog was doing fairly well. I was making a few $1,000s a month, and I also wound up doing some freelance work. So initially what I did was, I wound up doing some freelance work for the web design blog that I sold. So it was actually, 2 partners that bought it, and they hired me to do some of the content, a good bit of the content that continued, so I would write like an article a week or something. I don't remember exactly what it was at this point. And so that allowed me to make some money to supplement, until my photography blog took off a little bit more and to completely support my family. So, um, yeah, so it was kind of interesting how that worked out.
And your photography blog, well, you sold 2 photography blogs, again, for 500,000. So, I wanna kind of get into how these deals come about and how these deals are structured. Like, I'm assuming it's not like, Auto Trader or Craigslist or something, like, there's not a place where you post and say, "Okay, this is for sale," is there?
Actually, there is. So the first website that I sold, the one that I sold for $50,000 going back in 2010, I listed that at a site called Flippa. It's FLIPPA.com. So Flippa is essentially a marketplace for buying and selling websites or domain names. That's the only time I think that's the only time I used it. Um, and to be honest, I didn't have a great experience. So it's basically like an auction. Like you can list like a buy it now price. You can list a reserve price where it's like if the auction doesn't get to this amount, then the sale doesn't go through. So I listed my site. I had a reserve set for $50,000. I had a buy it now price of like I think it was $100,000. Um, and I had several bidders, but two that wound up, kind of going at it more than the others, and it wound up just getting over $50,000. And the guy who won the auction, like right after it ended, like a day later, emails me and says I can't go through with the purchase. His story was that his brother died in a car accident. I don't know if that was true or not. I think it may have been true because I had actually talked to the guy on the phone before. He was very nice. We had a good rapport, and he seemed like genuine, and he seemed like upset, disappointed that he couldn't buy the site. And he actually did come back to me like a month or two later, and said, "Hey, I'm ready to move forward if you still have the site." But I had actually sold it at that point. But anyway, so I listed it. The winning bidder backed out, and that is fairly common on Flippa, from what I was told anyway. Um, because the bids are non-binding. You still, like people can make a bid, but then you still have to like sign a contract or, actually complete the sale. So I had people contacting me while it was listed and saying, "Hey, if the guy who wins this auction drops out, let me know," because people wanted to get it at a discount. So I wound up reaching out to one of the guys that had contacted me, and he actually wasn't the one that wound up buying it, but he wound up having a friend that he introduced to me. So anyway, I listed it on Flippa. The guy who bought it didn't win the bid, but essentially that exposure on Flippa ultimately led to the sale of the site. So that is one place you can go to list a website is Flippa. I haven't used it in the past. Like I said, I didn't have the best experience there. Um, you have to be careful if you use a site because there are some scammy people on there,
Mhm.
both buyers and sellers. And you really have to be careful and do your own due diligence. And yeah, and so I just choose to stay away from it. But there are brokers that you can use that will list online businesses. It's not always just websites or blogs. Sometimes it's I had an Amazon FBA business listed with a broker before. So they'll do e-commerce businesses where you're dealing with physical inventory and stuff, but
Mhm.
it's mostly an online business. There are a number of brokers. Empire Flippers is a big one. FE International. The one that I used a few years ago is called Quiet Light Brokerage. So there's if you just search for online broker or online business broker or website broker or whatever, you'll find a number of them. The downside to brokers is obviously there's a fee.
Mhm.
Um, it's usually somewhere like 10 to 15%. The percent might be lower if you're talking about like a website that's in the millions of dollars. The higher the dollar value goes, the lower percentage they're willing to take for selling it. Um, But for like the sites that I sold, like in the hundred thousands of dollars range, the percentage is usually like 10 to 15% of the selling price. Um, but the broker has connections, and so when I sold mine, I paid 10% in a broker fee, but it was worth it because the broker got a higher price than I would have been able to get on my own.
Mm.
So anyway, so yeah, so going through a broker is definitely a good option, especially if you haven't sold a site in the past, because the broker will kind of guide you through it. Now you still need to the broker's not going to make any decisions for you. You're still going to have to, be careful and read the contract. I would recommend getting an attorney to review a contract if you're talking about a larger amount of money. But the broker will guide you and give you some professional insight and expertise. I remember the one thing I was about to say was that one of the downsides to a broker is that they typically don't deal with like smaller valued websites because it's just not worth their time.
Mhm.
So it depends on the broker. Some of them will do smaller websites, but if you're trying to sell a website for like say $20,000 or something like that, your options are going to be a little bit more limited. A lot of the brokers will only deal with something that's going to sell for 100,000, 500,000. It really depends on the broker, um, but there are some Facebook groups, and I can send you links if you want to include in the show notes or anything. There are Facebook groups out there that exist just for flipping websites. So like if you have a website to sell and it's like a smaller site and you're trying to get $1,000, $10,000, whatever, you could just list it in this Facebook group, and people who buy sites browse through, and you'll probably get contacted by some people who are interested in buying it. So there are some ways to list a site, and also going through your own personal network, which is how my bigger sales have come about. Because as you run a site for several years, you'll get connected with other people in the industry, and then some of those people may ultimately wind up being interested in buying your site when the time comes. So your personal network, professional network, is a really good way to ultimately find a buyer as well.
Now, when we start talking about selling these blogs, obviously after the first one, it I would imagine maybe gets a little bit easier as you go, and it's easier to kind of say goodbye to some of these things that you've built up over time, especially when we're talking about some of the larger payouts and sums of money that you're getting from them. But were there any of the businesses or blogs that you sold that was just really a heartbreaker for you to let go of?
No, not really.
I mean,
I've
like I
always
said, that's a pretty significant amount of money, so I think it would be pretty hard to say no, but you never know.
Yeah, I've always seen my websites and blogs as just as a business. I don't really get personally attached to them. Um, Now, I would say the one that has been the hardest in 2018, the last one that I sold was a photography blog. It was a landscape photography blog, and I enjoyed that more than any site that I've that I've run in the past, and I was ready to sell it. It was time to move on, and that one wasn't a bigger sell. That one was 216,000, so it wasn't one of the bigger ones. But it was a site that I enjoyed, and if I could have any of my sites back, that's really the only one that I would want, I think. And I wouldn't, I've never considered trying to buy it back or anything, but that's the one that if I had to say, which site would I miss, that's the one.
And is that one still active? Is it still going? I mean,
It
it's
is,
from
yeah. So
2018.
I actually did some freelance writing for it um, over the last year or two. Not currently. It's still active. I'm guessing it's not doing all that great because they're not really posting on there very frequently and emailing the list very frequently and stuff. But it's still active. I think it's probably declined a bit though.
And now when we get into talking about Vital Dollar, and a personal finance blog, I'm gonna go ahead and assume that this was another one of the same instances where you weren't necessarily an expert in this. However, when we're talking about doing, one, two, three, about four deals, totaling well over $1 million, you probably had to figure out personal finances, pretty quick. So, is that how Vital Dollar came to be?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I've always had an interest in personal finance when I got out of college and started working and had a job where I had a 401k and stuff. I didn't really know anything about investing, and so I wanted to learn more about it. And so I've always had an interest in it. My parents raised me. My parents didn't make a lot of money. They were very smart, but they didn't. They chose careers that didn't pay all that well, and so things were always fairly tight growing up. We always had everything we needed and then some, but they were very good with their money, and they raised they raised me and my sister to manage our money well and to avoid debt and not spend money that we don't have and stuff. And so I was always pretty good with saving money and the managing money aspect. Um, and like I said, I've always had an interest in investing. So I had wanted to start a personal finance blog for a long time, going back several years, but I never had the time to do it with other projects. One of the things that I always struggle with um, is just avoiding starting too many different things. So at a lot of points throughout the past 11 years, I've had multiple websites. I've always had multiple websites. It's a matter of how many of them are really active. Um, it's easy to start something new, but it's hard to find the time to do everything that you want to do. And so it's very common for me to have something that I really want to do that I don't do it because I know I don't have time to do it very well. And so that's what it was with the personal finance blog. Like I wanted to start a personal finance blog for a long time, but I knew I didn't have time for it between my other websites. And so I just didn't do it for several years. And um, I started a few years ago, I started to come across more finance blogs that covered aspects related to making money. Originally, my interest was mostly on investing and managing money, saving money, and that sort of thing. And then I started coming across these blogs that were covering side hustles and blogging and making money online and ways to increase your income outside of a job. And these were things that I didn't necessarily associate with personal finance. But if you look at personal finance blogs, most of them today cover these types of content. Like, for example, Penny Hoarder is a really popular personal finance blog. They have a lot of content related to side hustles. And so I started coming across blogs like that. And I thought, you know what? I have a lot of experience with side hustles and making money online. And I have an interest in learning more about finance. And I already have pretty good experience with managing money and saving money. So I could probably combine all of these things into one blog, and ultimately that's what I decided to do. So you talked about me not being an expert, and that's true. I'm not a financial professional. I'm pretty good with saving money and managing money. I'm definitely not an expert with investing, although I've learned a lot over the years. So I really just have to limit myself, like I mentioned early on with my very first blog when I was, just learning web design and I was running a web design blog is I've learned that you really have to know what you're capable of in terms of content, know what types of content you can produce, and kind of know your limits. And so my limits with my web design blog, I mentioned they kind of expanded as I got more experience and as I got more knowledge. And that's kind of the way it's been with personal finance. I don't cover anything like too intense or too advanced in terms of investing or anything like that. But I cover, some more basic concepts. And then, as I get more experience, my capabilities expand a little bit and I'm able to write about more different things, if that makes sense.
When you were, thinking about starting Vital Dollar just after you had sold the last blog, um, personal finance was something that you were always interested in, but did the thought ever cross your mind to start a blog or even something like a coaching company? Because I know around that 2018 time, coaching companies, that's when they started to kind of pop up. Um, it, Coaching people how to start a blog and make money online.
I have done some consulting, coaching over the years. It's not something that I really advertise. I've never had started a company or had a website for the purpose of getting clients. I've never really advertised those services, but I have had people over the years come to me and ask if I do consulting, and one of the ways that that's come about is through podcasts. So I've done some other podcast interviews, and I've had people come and email me and say, "Hey, I heard you on this podcast, and I'm trying to start a blog myself, or I'm in the early stages, and I was wondering if you do any consulting." And so I have done consulting when someone approaches me about it. It's something I have thought about pursuing a little bit more. But one of the challenges is a lot of the people who I would be consulting most of the clients that I have had are in the early stages of blogging, and people who are in the early stages of blogging aren't making money yet with their blog. And so most people don't really have that much money to spend. And, so somebody might do an hour or a couple of hours of consulting, but I think I'd be looking for new clients a lot
Mhm.
because, it's tough. If I was doing more advanced stuff and I was, consulting with businesses or, people who had larger budgets and were going to be like a longer term coaching project, then, that might be a little bit different. But it's something I've considered, but it's nothing I've really pursued other than when people come to me.
And I guess it was kind of the same when you were starting that very first blog, right? You had put it together to start trying to get clients, and ultimately it led to actually having a blog about what you were doing as opposed to getting clients. It seems like that going out and trying to get clients, it just seems like it's something that maybe isn't a top priority for you.
Yeah, it's like I mentioned early on, I found that I enjoyed running the blog a little bit more than I enjoyed the client work. Um, the consulting clients I've had, I have really enjoyed. So that is something that I would be open to and something I would consider. But I think it also depends on what other options I'm pursuing at the moment. Like when I had a web design blog that was growing really fast and was getting hundreds of thousands of visitors and peaked at 1 million visitors a month, and I could make pretty good money just by putting ads in the site or putting affiliate links on the site. It just was a better use of my time to focus on the blog than it was, to do an hour or two of consulting for somebody. Um, so, if I had a bigger project that was going to be like a longer term thing, then maybe it would have swayed me to make it a better use of my time. But, it was just when my site was really growing, it was a better use of my time to put it into the site, to be honest. And so that's kind of a part of it too, is what I have to look at what what options I have for using my time. If I'm working 40 or 50 hours a week, there's only so many things I can do. And so, you just kind of have to look at at the current options and see what's best.
Well, and it's one of the things that you mentioned there, which is actually something that I wanted to ask you about, was placing ads on the site and affiliate marketing. Those are some things that you definitely have to be very careful of now, and you have to kind of let people know, like, hey, this link is an affiliate link, and I'm gonna I could potentially get a payment if you go on and purchase something through here. So how did you kind of navigate some of that stuff, especially in the beginning where it was probably kind of like murky waters there?
Yeah, that's really changed a lot over the last few years. When I started, those regulations really weren't around. Um, when I started, people were selling links openly. Like, I know this is not like an FTC or a government regulations issue. This is more of a Google thing. But like, um, people were selling links for the purpose of, of SEO. And I remember when Google first started handing out manual penalties to people who were selling links or buying links, and bloggers have been doing it openly, like buy a link in my sidebar or whatever. And then all of a sudden, people started getting penalized, and it's like, what do you mean I'm getting penalized for selling a link? Um, and now, everything. If you're selling a link, it's all no followed in order to stay in Google's, you know, in order to stay in compliance with their terms and avoid getting a penalty. But I remember when that wasn't the case, people were just openly selling links. And the same thing with affiliate links. Like, in my first few blogs, I never had disclosures or privacy policies, those sort of things. It wasn't around back then, at least not with blogs, maybe with bigger sites. But that wasn't something that bloggers had to worry about back in 2007. Um, so originally, I really didn't have an issue with it. The one thing I did have some problems with, and I really didn't pursue affiliate marketing right away with my blog because I put a few affiliate links on the blog early on, and I got like a few comments from people who didn't like the affiliate links, and I kind of let that get to me, and I just didn't use affiliate programs for a long time, and I missed out on a lot of money because I would just use a standard link instead of an affiliate link. And then eventually I was like, you know what? I'm looking for a way to increase the income. I think I should, probably look into this. And I started adding affiliate links, and, nothing happened. I didn't get negative comments. I didn't get upset people or anything like that. So I think part of it was just the expectations of visitors had changed a little bit over time. And also I kind of listened to the vocal minority early on, and, a few people spoke up, and probably 99% of the people wouldn't have had an issue with it, but I listened to the 1% of people who were speaking up. And yeah, so basically the bottom line is things have really changed over the years, and it's completely different now, and you have to be careful with privacy policies and disclosures and all that stuff. But back in 2007, that wasn't so much of an issue.
Yeah, 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 I'm sure. One of the things that you had mentioned that I really honed in on was that you didn't start your financial blog because you knew that you couldn't give it 100%, right? And so uh, a lot of times, the running theme for the podcast here is, you're doing it for yourself. You have been blogging and building websites and selling those websites and then kind of just doing it, rinse and repeat over the last, 11 plus years. So, one of the things that people can sometimes struggle with is, they don't start for one reason or another. And they tend to get analysis paralysis. And so I want you to think back to that point where you were like, "No, I'm not gonna start it. I'm not gonna start it," but you ended up starting it. And so, put yourself back in that position and think of how you felt there. And is there any piece of advice that you could give to somebody who is in that position and needs kind of a little kick in the ass to get going?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I always have to look at it and say, am I going to be able to do it well? And if I can't do it well, then it's going to do more harm than good because it's going to take away from something else. Like if I have two websites and I'm already splitting my time between the two of them, and I try to start something else, then everything's going to go downhill. And whatever I start is going to wind up getting abandoned anyway. And I know this because I've tried it. I've had websites that I started with good intentions, and then I just didn't have time for it, and they kind of got dropped. So I've learned that I really have to be realistic about my time, and if I don't have time for it, just not to do it. But when the time came, you know, I think you just have to you have to be willing to try and to learn. And I think the biggest thing that I hear from people who have an interest in starting is just, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I'd like to do what you do, but I don't know how to do it. But the truth is, I didn't know how to do it when I started either. I didn't know what I was doing at all. I just learned as I went. So I think you really just have to be willing to learn as you go and be willing to cut yourself some slack. Understand that you're going to make some mistakes, and you don't have to be perfect. But you're going to learn a lot more by doing than you are by reading or just by observing. So you could be sitting on the sidelines for 2 or 3 years thinking about starting a blog, but you're going to be a lot further along if you actually started. And that first blog that you start may wind up being a total failure, and that's okay. That's the way it usually works. But you're going to learn a lot more from it than you're going to learn just by sitting on the sidelines. So I would say, my advice to people who are thinking about starting something is just get started and learn as you go, and understand that you're going to make mistakes. Don't feel like you have to be perfect. Any blogger that you talk to is going to tell you that they made a ton of mistakes in the beginning and still make mistakes. I still make mistakes all the time. So, um, but I think a lot of people are afraid to make a mistake, or afraid to fail, really afraid to do something wrong. And so they feel like they can't get started until they know what they're doing. And really, that I think is the wrong approach.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 1000% there. And I think it's not even just with blogging, but it's with starting anything. Making that leap to do your first triathlon, or starting, a weight loss journey that you need to start. And people just they sit and they read and they try and figure out what's going to be the best way for me to lose weight, what's the best cardio for me to lose weight, what's the best diet for me to lose weight, and they start reading and they think, oh, well, I could never do that. I could never, cut out carbs completely, or I could never swim 1.2 miles, let alone then have to go ride a bike and run after that. But, you're gonna learn by doing, just like you said, and maybe the diet without carbs isn't the diet for you, but how are you gonna know that without trying it? So I think that's a very, very great point that you bring up there.
Yeah, I know I've always learned a lot more just by experience than anything else.
And so, if you could do me a favor before we wrap up here, just let everybody know where they can find you, and what you're up to, or where you want to point the listeners to kind of keep up with what Mark is doing.
Sure. So the best place to find me is vitaldollar.com. That's my personal finance blog. Um, on the site, there's a contact form. If you wanted to get in touch with me, just fill out the contact form and it will come straight to me. Um, that's really my only site that I'm managing at the moment. I'm planning to start another photography site, but I haven't started that yet. So yeah, for right now, I'm just managing Vital Dollar, and I am doing some freelance work here and there, but that's really my only site at the moment.
Fantastic. Well, Mark, I just want to say again, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast this evening. I really appreciate the time that you've given us, and I wish you continued success, both with Vital Dollar and potentially the new photography blog.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
All right, my friends, that is it. That is my episode with Mark Andre. And I just want to take a minute to thank Mark for coming on the podcast and sharing his story here with us. It was a great conversation and I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed learning something about this world that I was really pretty ignorant to. And I didn't realize quite how much money can be traded potentially when we're talking about buying and selling websites and domain names, and things that are already well established businesses. Obviously, I knew that people sell businesses all the time, but I didn't realize the amount of money that was being traded when it came to purchasing websites. It was something that was very interesting to me. So I appreciate Marc coming on and sharing his story with us. I appreciate you, the listeners, coming and hanging out with us today. I know that time is a valuable thing, so I am grateful that you chose to use some of your time and spend it with us here on the podcast. With that being said, if you could give me just 2 more minutes of your time and leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcast or whatever app you are using to consume this, I would greatly appreciate that time that you give to write that review. It's something that just takes a couple of minutes, but it's something that really helps the show out. So if you could do that, like I said, I'd really appreciate it. That is it. That's all I have for you. I hope that you have a great week, great weekend, and I look forward to having you back for the next episode.